Okay, and I press got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So we were talking last time about the half pendant of life, and you remembered something later on. Do you want to explain that?
Give me $20, and yes, I will.
Checks in the mail.
Yeah, different day and a different Greenfield. The half pendants, yeah. After we spoke, it just kind of clicked because you asked if we had actually placed them. I'm sorry, you asked if we told the contestants where they were. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, we did not. Okay, but we want to, you got to understand something, and this is very evident in fandom kind of responses to the show. We wanted people to win. Okay, they didn't want people to win because they didn't have a big enough prize budget. Are you kidding me? That was my job. Okay, I was in charge of prizes, and every time we lost, it killed us because, again, we walked the kids through the temple. They knew everything. It's quiet because there's no studio audience at that point. It's just, the music. That way Kirk's able to scream and tell them, no, go left, go right, go do whatever. And the rest of us are yelling too. You can't hear that because in sweetening, we're covering with applause. And again, the music is blaring. So that's one misconception. We wanted, at least, I think we were budgeted for like 2/3 wins, 2/3 of all 40 shows to be won. And I don't know how many were, and don't tell me, I don't want to get depressed this early in the day, but
-7.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
-7. I don't know. So
Okay.
It was so hard that people actually had to give you guys trips for losing.
Yeah, well, but again, and I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you two things, but we had so many, between Nickelodeon and Disney World, okay, we had our big shed of prizes. Disney World was like 20 feet from our studio, and that's where we ate every day, which was always weird because you're sitting there with Mickey and Pluto with their heads off, and but man, inexpensive. So Doug DeLuca, sorry, Doug. He was a producer he was an associate producer, great guy, big guy. And he worked on Legends. He then went on to stay with Stone's Family for the Man Show, which was Jimmy Kimmel. And then when Jimmy got his own show, Doug went over, and he's still there at the Jimmy Kimmel Show here in 2022, just to let you know when we recorded this. So we wanted more wins, and it was just crazy. So same thing with the half pendants. Obviously, there were certain rooms, there's no way they would be able to find the pendant. You can't put it in the dark forest because that's full of plastic, little plastic balls, okay? And our prop master, that was one of his jobs, just throw in more plastic balls in the dark forest, put more foam rubber in the, what's that, the pit of despair, the first part where we go on the rope, okay? So again, there's no place in there unless you put it on one of the ledges that go into the hatches. So that limited it down to the rooms that had ample places to actually see it, because we don't want it disguised. We wanted them to be able to look around quickly and the half pendant, not, oh, I'm sorry you couldn't find it. It was underneath these clothes over here that were left in the lion's den, whatever. So yeah, we didn't tell them where, but they were hidden in plain sight. And speaking of which, I mentioned to you before the show, before this show, that even though we created and prototyped all the temple games here in LA and then trucked them to Orlando, which may sound like a bit too much work, but we knew how they worked. In fact, we even prototyped, Scott Stone, our executive producer, lived on Doheny. I mentioned to you, Chuck Barris lived on Doheny. Well, so did Scott. It's a popular street. My ex-girlfriend did too. But we tried just a couple of times moat crossings in Scott's pool, because where else are you going to try a moat crossing? Not going to go to lake, and there's no moats in Los Angeles that I know of. So we tested a lot of them at Scott's house, and I actually got paid for that. That was pretty cool. So yeah, so that's it for the half legends, and I mean the half legends. Okay. They have pendants, and what else could I fill in the gaps on for legends?
I was just curious because you produced the last season. Do you know why there wasn't a season 4 in 1996?
Nobody does.
All right.
It's unfortunate. I mean, again, second season, I'm walking into the show, second season, they won a cable ace. Nobody knows what a cable ace is now, but back then there was network TV and they would get Emmy Awards. Okay. And then there were cable stations, TBS, TNT, Nickelodeon, you know, they weren't so much subservient or in any way less, but of course you had to pay for cable and people didn't pay for cable yet. I mean, some people did, but season 2, Cable Ace Award. How great is that? We're going in, okay? Season 3 now, we're nominated for a Cable Ace Award, okay? I remember getting the actual certificate. I put it on my wall. I said, wow, this is cool. And we all thought for sure we were going to get picked up. There was no sense of anything because, you know, the audiences, the contestants, everybody, you know, was on board. And Sal Maniaci, who was head of programming, and if you watch that YouTube video, he's the one doing the moat crossing, and he's gone on to other places. He headed up the Food Network. He may still be there, but he was all for the show too. I just don't know. I honestly do not know.
Am I correct? Am I correct? And if it had been picked up in 1996, you would have wanted to produce it?
Absolutely. But yeah, as I said before, you know, I had never, other than $1 a second, which was a gratuity from Chuck Barris after I had my head accident, and for Bob Eubanks, again, in 1980, all the shows went off the air, and Chuck being the good guy that he is, I told you about, again, just bringing 7 of us to his house for Thanksgiving. We weren't friends. He just did that kind of stuff. $1 a second he handed me, it's like, I don't know how to do a stunt show. That was 1980, 81. Okay, here it is now, 1995. I hadn't done a stunt show since then, and I was lousy at it. Bob will tell you. And you know, again, it's on YouTube. But so the good news is, I made it through by learning about harnessing, because again, the whole idea, the biggest problem was not what you know this stuff better than I do. For example, the one stunt where I've got a harness on and I've got a rope attached to my back and my partner is on the other end. I'm taking a boulder, here it comes, and you throw the boulder up and it goes down a chute and then they catch it on the other end, okay? That's a real easy stunt to produce. That's an easy one to come up with. And I could do that, you know, till kingdom come. But the actual rigging stunts where, you know, they're up in the air and they've got to get stuff, that I can't do. The counterbalance, that's a piece of cake. Well, it's not, it's actually a piece of wood. But yeah, so there were certain stunts that I could do after that, meaning it was on the job training for me, because primarily, you know, I was coming up with the legends. I had to produce the actual legends. I was there, you know, I don't know if I mentioned this, you know, people seem to know that D was the voice of Olmec, of course, and he's in behind Olmec. But did I mention that I'm in there with him the entire stuff?
Not in the not in the last recording, no.
Okay, all right. Well, this was a night more for D than for me. Again, you know, it's dark. Okay, we've got duvetine, which is black velvet that we use in television. Duvetine around us, so anybody walking by can't hear. And Dee's got the mic right there, and I've got an IFB in my ear trying to listen. I've got the booth in one ear, and I've got the contestants in the other ear, and I got Dee standing right here doing voice of Olmec. So the kids are on the steps of knowledge, and the multiple choice questions were always easiest because you know that. I could I could hear them, but occasionally they would come up with an answer which was close to the real answer. And Dee's looking at me, waiting on home, and I'm thinking, I can't hear. There were so many times where we were just so frustrated when we got through. I know the steps of knowledge probably seem to you and most viewers like the easiest thing in the world, but for me, getting through all 4 steps of knowledge it's not quite the way to say it, was just a dream come through, because we dream come true. Sorry, no sleep. Because once we were done, Dee and I were sweating, break for lunch. Yeah. Oh my God. And yeah, I was thrilled when that was done, because we couldn't take up that much time. With the Mo Crossings, we'd have, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, everybody tried out the Mo Crossings first. It wasn't like, come on, Joshua, I'll tell you about it when you do it, because nobody would succeed. Nobody would even understand what it was. I mean, these are kids, they're scared, and here's the Mo Crossing. Okay, all you got to do is grab that and keep going and cross it, go. They would be frozen. So every single contestant got a shot at their Mo Crossing before we started, okay? But again, didn't take up too much time. Steps of knowledge, all we did was test the mics, make sure the lockouts were working on the steps, boom, 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 crank them out, switch scripts, etc. So that's where we got our time. But again, we're talking about an 8-hour day. And you got to remember that every show that I'd ever produced, we did 5 shows in a day, usually 3 before lunch, 2 after, in some cases 2 before, but you always want to get through 3. So not coast, but for example, a newlywed game, Bob would have enough time to lose money in poker. And Johnny Jacobs too. No, Johnny was a great player, but yeah, because you got to remember, with the temple games especially, we had to move them in, because we never had the same 3 temple games in the same shows. So we always had to at least, forget the air dates, we had to at least move 1, possibly 2 temple games in, or more, as we're doing 4 sets of temple games. So you got to move them in, move them out. You may have to adjust the lighting. Ideally, Jim Karn was set up for massive lighting, but again, some stuff had to be adjusted, for certain games, especially when they're up there and we're shooting up into the grid. Not ideal. So there's a lot of time in between. And the great thing for the kids, of course, was, for, let's say it's show 1, okay, they're rehearsing, but some of the kids, depending on the day and depending on how tough things are, but we wouldn't necessarily stash the kids away, because, there was nothing terribly secret about anything we were doing, because everything would change for their show. So we had kids come down to the set if it was a long day, because they could only play cards so long in the room. That's what they had, decks of playing cards, and that kept them occupied. But, they were briefed by Andy Caladrino, who's the head contestant coordinator. I had final briefing, so they would know me and I'd be on set with them. But it was for the kids, and for Kirk especially, it was nothing, it was just very casual on the set. There was no stress. And the kids, until they felt comfortable in harnesses, in the games, balanced, etc., we wouldn't start. But that ate up a huge chunk of time. The good thing about taking the time there was the temple runs took no time at all, because the temple runs, again, we could just crank them out. And, you have to set 3 minutes on the clock, you'd have to put the artifact back into where it was, from the first show, and then change it for the second show, third show, fourth show. Jumping back for a second, again, even though all the temple games originated here in LA and we built them all, it was Nickelodeon that actually built the artifacts. And they really did a terrific job, except for the dried ear corn of Sojourner Truth, which it was just a last minute thing. And yeah, the last legend ever written until the new version. Whew. So yeah, that was it, Legends. And again, I mean, Kirk was sure that it was going to come back. Yeah, we were all shocked, surprised, disappointed, certainly. But the great thing about working for Stone Stanley was it really was, and you hear this all the time, it was a family operation. Well, so is Dick Clark, so the good companies all made it familial. As I stated before, in case nobody checked in for 3 hours, I started off there doing 2 shows, Quicksilver and Free for All, tried them out, presented them for USA. Scott and David pretty much hands off, except they built a makeshift set for us. And again, they both sold. I produced Quicksilver, did 6 shows in a day. Somebody else produced Free for All, which good friend of mine, Mark Wahlberg. Do you know Mark?
Mark L. Wahlberg, the announcer.
Yes, he hosted. This was his first. He was on Shop the season before. He was the guy that he was the assistant to Pat Finn before I came on board with Shop, and Mark was great. So this was his first shot at Free for All. And then somehow, I don't know, but he got Antiques Roadshow, which is still running. And then he got 10 years or so ago, Temptation Island, which is a very titillating ripoff of The Bachelor, as it were. And now, I hope it's still on the air as of last season, he was doing, is it called Love Island? It's the same bloody show again, except Mark's there, more couples. It's like my career. You do the same show 50 times, okay, like with Meryl Heater. I did Hollywood Squares under 20 different names, but people ate it up. You know, you can't go wrong. Like with Meryl, if funny is funny, and if we could produce a show that's funny, or in the case of Stone Stanley, always entertaining shows. You know, unlike the show I did right after Lunches. But
well,
yeah,
you brought it up. Let's talk a little bit about Family Challenges to get it out of the way. Was that also shot in Orlando? Am I correct in that?
No. So we came back from Orlando, and you know, they're editing, and we're sitting around waiting to see what's going on. And again, Scott and David were very not laissez-faire, but you know, they weren't strict about, okay, you guys are done, get out. You know, it wasn't that at all. You know, we came back and we had time. And again, Todd Nelson, I can't say enough about Todd. On Legends, for example, one thing, I don't know if the fans think about this, but granted, I would write all the legends, but then the tougher part was tying in the temple game to the stunt, okay? And for the life of me, sometimes to the legend, sorry, no sleep. Sometimes, you know, again, we'd switch out a temple game. Sometimes we'd have to, either it was broken or we used it too many times or whatever, we'd switch a temple game. And, you know, for the muscle shell armor, which by the way, I just want to mention something on muscle shell armor. I don't know how we let that go by. Jed wrote that, but muscle shells are about the weakest crustacean shell in the world. Oysters, okay, that's a hard shell. Clams are hard. Mussels you can break with your fingers. So I don't know how the hell that got through. But I'm sorry, taking me back. Where was I?
Tying in the legend to the challenge and having to replace it with Todd Nelson.
Yeah, I was okay at it, but sometimes it just got beyond me. And Todd Nelson, boom, Todd would come up something, you know, sometimes when Harriet Tubman would get lost, you know, she would need to crawl up and find you know, and he was just great at this. So he would fill in the gaps there. Anyway, so Legends is over. Not that we were going to come back immediately, but you know, my whole life and most producers is going 13 weeks to 13 weeks to 13 weeks. Normally, you don't get the 13 weeks right after the 13 weeks are up, but sometimes you do. In this case, we did. Somehow, Woody Frazier, who had done the Mike Douglas show and the Steve Allen show and the Holmes show and a lot of stuff, but never had done really a game show. He somehow convinced the Family Channel, which was a brand new channel at that point, and wanted kids programming on in the afternoon. Okay, fine. So we go over, and I met with Richard Crystal, who was the quote producer of the show, Richard Crystal being Billy Crystal's brother. And he likewise had never worked on a stunt show, which was great for me because I could come up with the stunts and he would just buy them. So I took Todd Nelson with me. It was myself, Todd, another guy named Todd Barton, and we would shoot one day. I've never done a show like this, okay? Dave Garrison was also a producer on the show, and he had his own segment producers. So on tape days, we would swap out. One day I would do 5 shows, and then the next tape day, he would do 5 shows. But we weren't in competition, at least that I'm aware of. And Richard was there, but Richard was in the booth. You know, you don't, if you're a producer, you produce on the floor. You know, you stop, you do, you move. Sitting in the booth behind the director isn't producing. But Richard was terrific and great at the stunts. But once again, Todd came through. The problem with Family Challenge was there was no rhyme or reason to how the stunts worked. You know, we had, and they were just horrible. First off, let me just say this. I worked at every studio in town, you know, from Network Studios, Hollywood Center, Sunset Studios, everywhere. But none of us had never worked at a place called Glendale Studios. And there's a good reason. So we all show up the day one, we go to Glendale Studios, and this place is falling apart. I mean, the signs askew and it's dirty. There's no grass. It's just patchy mud. And then there's the parking lot. And we were told, well, no, you can't use the parking lot because we're going to be doing stunts back there. I'm thinking, well, how are they going to dress this parking lot? They didn't. Woody got it in his head, just, that's Woody. He would do things like, he fell in love with steamrollers, okay? He had done this on another, like a Steve Allen show, taking steamrollers, like David Letterman with watermelons, okay? Throwing them off the NBC building. Mm-hmm. Woody loved smashing stuff. And I remember for a while, we had to literally put in every episode some kind of outdoor steamroller stunt where we were, the kids are basically running this steamroller around this ugly asphalt parking lot, no lights, just ambient lighting. And likewise, there was a, oh, now it just comes back to me. There was a huge slide. The bonus round was outdoors as well. And there was some kind of, you probably, I haven't seen it in years, maybe it's on YouTube, some kind of slide that they went down or through, and that was our bonus. But even that, it was something that was inflatable. That was the problem with the show. A lot of inflatable stuff. Likewise, we had very large wading pools on set. I say on set, there was no set. It was just the floor and a hard cyclorama, that's the wall. And, you know, it was lit with whatever patterns, but Woody wasn't going to spend money on lighting. And it just was not fun. The kids might have had fun, but I don't know, swimming through baked beans to find objects, which was their goal, you know, taking a little bit of legends, you know, you got to find this at the bottom of the, but we did that every day. It was one day it's baked beans, the next day it's hydrochloric acid. Just kidding. But yeah, the repetition was not fun. And the stunts themselves, because again, Woody kind of had final say over it as opposed to Richard. Woody would change stuff last minute. And Woody would like, just like, here's a dumb one. I remember because I had to sing Happy Birthday. It's a stunt, and we're talking to our host, Ray Combs, who I'll get to in a second. And we're talking to Ray, and Woody and Todd come out with a big sheet cake, and they're walking on stage, and they're talking about something. And purposely, we knew this was, you know, it was Ray's birthday. May he rest in peace. And I start singing Happy Birthday. I'm on camera again. I'm getting paid. This is great. And Woody and Todd drop the cake and fall into it because that's Woody's idea of funny. And then it was up to the kids. It was a memory game. The kids had to remember, like Legends almost. I guess they really did rip off Legends. Remember, what did he say before he brought, what did it say on the cake? It's like, who the hell cares? But yeah, we made it through there. But every day that we drove there, it was just horrible. And lunch breaks, again, we were doing Family Challenge, and likewise, Woody had sold wild animal games, which we cut down to WAG. Nobody's going to say wild animal games, wild animal. So it's called WAG. And Ryan Seacrest, was his first job. And Ryan and I became very good friends. Ryan had a monkey sidekick, so why wouldn't he be friends with me? But we hung out together, and that's probably the best part of the show, was hanging out with Richard Crystal, who was just a great guy, and Ryan at the time, who was just a great guy. And yeah, and I had my Todd, I had all good people around me. It was just the show itself. Now, Ray Combs, the name probably means nothing to people, but he hosted Family Feud, I believe, right after Richard Dawson. I could be wrong on the timing, but he was good on Family Feud, good. But something happened. The first half of the season, Ray was pretty good. We would explain the game, and of course, everything was on cue cards. But about halfway through, I don't know if it was psychological, I don't know, we all kind of thought he was taking drugs, but I've never seen drugs affect a person like this. Ray would start the intro, which is supposed to take 30 or 45 seconds, and he would go on, and it was in such a circuitous manner. And initially we would stop, go up to Ray, all you got to do is tell the kid, okay, he's got to do this. Then he takes that and he puts that over here. Okay, then the two of you work together and you do that. Okay, Ray's got it. And Ray would still, I'm not kidding, sometimes it was 12 minutes. And what we had to do, because Ray wasn't listening, we just let it run. And then we chopped it. And it looked chopped too, in editing, because Ray just became uncontrollable. Again, I don't know what happened to him. I would brief Ray in between meals. I won't reveal his personal life, but Ray, he got into this habit.
By the way,
I'm sorry.
You don't have to get into any details if you don't.
No, not to. This is nothing. Ray, you wouldn't mind this. He would, he'd be changing his clothes, and he'd be in his underwear, and he'd have a full length mirror. And he's talking to me. He was always posing, and he was in okay shape, but he's not Schwarzenegger. He's always posing, and he had never done that before. He's constantly doing that, but he's listening, but he's not really. Kind of like I told you, Chuck Woolery didn't want to know the dates on Love Connection. And when an entire show is scripted like Love Connection was, and you're not asking the question that the contestant is expecting you to ask, the show goes downhill. And the same thing happened. Ray lost it. And then unfortunately, when the show ended and we did get picked up, but luckily Stone Stanley said, "Hey, David, come on back." I didn't have to do the second season, but Ray committed suicide, and I believe Michael Berger took over. And Michael, it's so funny. I love Michael. Terrific warm-up, terrific host, terrific everything. The only thing I did with him was produce the Mike and Maddie show pilot, because Harry Freeman was unavailable, but Harry took it over. So yeah, I don't have much good stuff to say about Family Challenge. It just
is it.
Yeah.
Is it hard to produce a show when it's not? I mean,
yeah.
Am I correct in assuming that you didn't feel the show itself was very good in terms of as a viewer?
Yes.
Is it hard to do that when the show's not good to produce?
Yes and no. Meaning we didn't, because the executive producers and the producer didn't really know what a good stunt was. And I'm coming from Stone Stanley land, and they had done JD's Underground, which was their first show, first game show, I believe. Not JD, that was the pilot we did. JD's Funhouse. I also produced JD's Underground, which was JD's talk show, but another story. And Todd as well. Yeah, sure enough, we went on, and what happened to Stone Stanley in between, while I was over at Family Challenge for Family Channel, New World Entertainment had opened up this huge office, not in Hollywood, but over in West LA. And Stone Stanley for a time became part of New World Entertainment. So all of a sudden, Scott, David, Tanya, their assistant, We had a new receptionist. Brennan was there, and then a revolving group of producers that came in because they were going to do Let's Make a Deal, but as a big show. But it was really interesting because New World was there, FX was there as well, and my good friend Bob Bowden was at FX, and didn't happen yet, but I was able to produce yet another one of my shows, went to New York, and I produced a show called The Imposters, produced, directed, wrote, edited, did everything, and then came back from New York in 5 days. Anyway, so while we were at New World, Brandon Tartikoff, who had been at NBC and who knew me from I'm Telling, Brandon's 2 offices over. Scott and David are starting to get friendly with Brandon, and they're talking about doing stuff together, and this is just great. I'm selling a show and we're doing shows, and then Brandon passes away, and that was unexpected because he's a young guy, and he was Mr. NBC, and now he was going to be Mr. New World, and we all got along, and it was horrible. Anyway, so I believe I'm going in order. We went back to Hollywood Center, which is no longer called Hollywood Center, and I think that's when they were doing a big Let's Make a Deal. When I say big, now of course all game shows go into prime time, but back then we didn't. But this was an attempt by some network, I don't remember, to do Let's Make a Deal as an hour, as a huge event kind of show, and so be it. I didn't work on it though. They said, David, they being Scott and David, said, we're going to do a smaller version of the show. Unbeknownst to, I think it was for Fox, if I'm not mistaken. So you got big Let's Make a Deal on one stage, and then on a little bitty stage, you've got my Let's Make a Deal, which I wrote and I produced. And we got Marc Kriske, who you wouldn't know. He does the Channel 5 news out here. He does the weather. Still doing the weather all these years later. And anyway, so we did a little Let's Make a Deal. It was stunty as opposed to more traditional Let's Make a Deal. And neither one worked and neither one sold. But as luck would have it, because Scott and David, we got Shop Till You Drop picked up again from the prior season. But as I said, Mark Wahlberg was gone because he was moving on. He was now a host. And that was the toughest part for me. And again, Shop, another stunt show. But coming off of Legends, it was easier because A, I had Todd Nelson with me again. B, it was the first time I'm working with John Kirhoffer, who I learned early on, unlike Legends, where we prototyped way out in the valley on this big lot because, we needed the space. I had to rent space not far from our offices where John could have enough room to build prototypes for Shop, a huge sink, it had to have drainage because, again, we'd be painting and stuff and all these kind of things that I'd never had to do before. We did. And John was incredible. John Kirhoffer had a truck full of tools, and he could build anything and everything we came up with. And that was truly a fun show. And I finally came into my own in terms of stunts on that show because A, it was very casual. B, I inherited the prop master and several other really terrific people from the prior seasons of Shop. And again, we just had fun. Again, you hear about this occasionally. Forgive my language. There were no assholes anywhere on the Shop set. And Pat Finn is one of the nicest, brightest people you'd ever want to meet. Now, the toughest part of Shop Till You Drop, because the stunts were pretty easy to sell to Scott and David. One of them would come over to the prototype area. Some of them would be purposely outrageous and silly because that was my nature. And they knew that. They knew that like 75% of them might work. And then 25% of them were Greenfield stunts. And, we had one where it was a cow and you would take the cow's tail and stuff would come out of the cow's But and I don't remember the rationale for it. It was ridiculous. I knew it wouldn't work, but it was funny to see. I mean, you had to see it. We taped all of the prototype sessions so that if David came over, Scott could see it. But it's a real easy show to do, except for the end game, because on Shop Till You Drop, which everybody seemed, whenever I used to say, yeah, I produced Shop Till You Drop, say, oh, I love that show. And I say, really? That's really nice. Yeah, oh, they're running through the supermarkets. And no. That's supermarket sweeps. For some reason, you say Shop Till You Drop, people think, because again, they ran around shopping, but Shop Till You Drop was a mall. You know, it was a huge mall, and you have to run up and down the stairs and go to different malls, etc. But the end game, where they had the various prizes, they had to reach a certain amount without going over. I can't remember the actual equation that we used, but in the prior season or two seasons, I believe, of Shop Till You Drop, that was always a nightmare. They were always over budget. And if I could be proud of one thing, it was the fact that I nailed, along with Rachel Bressler, who was my prize coordinator on that show, and that's all she did, was try and set up the equations for how to get them to win. Again, like Legends, we wanted wins, and the way the prize structure worked, it was not it wasn't that easy to win unless we set stuff at different prices correctly. That was a nightmare. But again, 5 shows in a day. Pat Finn was a dream. The announcer that we had replaced Marc didn't work out so well. In fact, the next season, Dee, the voice of Olmec, came in, and he was on the next season of Shop, but I had moved on. So yeah, Shop Till You Drop, that was 1996. That was the year after Legends, and we kept working. And then I mentioned this. Do you have any questions about Shop?
Just one quick question for stunt shows, because I think that might be the last stunt show that you did. Am I correct?
No.
Okay.
Next one coming up.
Okay.
Yeah,
But well, I'll ask it now. Are you calling the stunts, as in judging them, or is Todd doing that, or is someone else doing that?
Judging the stunts came down to me.
Okay.
Yeah. And whereas on Legends, you know, we're all doing it, meaning the spotters on Legends, you know, everybody's, two, they made around, they got 2 boulders, they got 2, whatever, 3, we're all doing it. We all knew, we all knew the whole process. Whereas Family Challenge, good luck. We did a notable thing about Family Challenge, if it's in reruns, Billy Crystal's daughter was our spotter, great kid. And she'd never worked in TV. I don't know if she ever did, but beautiful girl. And hi, how are you? So anyway, Shop's done. Scott and David are starting to work. I mean, they're busy. They're doing Loveline with Dr. Drew. I haven't thought about this in years, but Loveline with Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla. And that was full time, because that show just took off. I mean, it was huge for people that weren't around back then. It was one of the most popular shows on cable. So Scott and David are focused on that. I got an offer from All American TV, which is where they had bought the Goodson Library. That's where I did Match Game and To Tell the Truth, whatever, which none of which sold. But they came up with a show called Zooventure. And they had started producing Zooventure. When I say started, they were attempting to prototype. And once again, great people, but they'd never done a stunt show before. So they go, they go to the stunt master. I mean, I had done 3 stunt shows, but again, I'm a writer, not a stunt producer. But for some reason, with Zooventure, which was a dream, you had J.D. Roth, who I knew very well. Okay, again, not just from Stone Stanley. I knew J.D. because we did a pilot of his own show called J.D.'s Underground. I had Todd Nelson back again. As I said, John Kirhoffer, basically the shop staff, we all went over to All American, and we did Zooventure, and we went down to San Diego Zoo. And as I mentioned several hours ago on the before I changed shirts, Zooventure was a dream because Animal Planet loved me. For some reason, the head of Animal Planet thought it was the funniest, most creative person he'd ever met. We had dinner all the time. I knew the show was going to get picked up. And the staff was nice enough, meaning the executive producers were nice enough to basically, for that first season, take a backseat to me and let me produce the show. And, and I'd come up with, it was the one show where I came up with stunts where Todd and John and JD would say, wow, that one's great. And they all had to be tied into animals because, the hook of the show was A, it's outdoors, B, it's in the San Diego Zoo, and C, we had live animals, that hopefully most people had not seen. It wasn't a matter of, oh, it's a chimpanzee. Yeah, right. You'd have all sorts of something called a lesser panda. There were meerkats. There were also, it was terrific. And as I mentioned before, once we wrapped that show, we always got 5 shows out in 8 hours, but we had to bring a truck down to San Diego. And likewise, a generator. It was my job to lock up the zoo. I don't know why, okay, because you would think in a zoo, isn't there somebody in charge overnight? What if one of the animals get sick? What if, I don't know, something happens? But it wasn't the case at the San Diego Zoo then. But yeah, we had fun because afterwards, we'd occasionally, whatever that means, and just hang out in the zoo. And then we go back to the hotel and start again the next day. But it was a dream show. And probably the biggest mistake I made was not doing the second season of Zooventure, which I'll get to. But we had fun. But again, with Todd and John and, all the entire shop crew, it was great. And JD, JD's like Pat, you can't throw him. Kirk Fogg is a terrific guy, but I would not cast him as a game show host, meaning I don't think he's got the chops. And it's not a put down to Kirk. He's probably a better actor than he is a game show host. There wasn't much that he had to do on Legends. But in terms of working with contestants, knowing when to go in, when to sit back, Pat, JD, they were just experts. Anyway, so the next show I did, is that what we're doing? Moving on, do we have to hear about my next show? Because I was ill prepared. Harry Freeman was producing Jeopardy and had been for a while. And somehow Disney decided to do a ripoff of Jeopardy. It was called Debt, D-E-B-T. What was the year? Let's see. Again, I did Zooventure. So again, Let's Make a Deal, 96. Shop Do You Drop, 96. Zooventure, 97. Debt, 97. The Imposters, 97. All right, so we'll stop. The Imposters I told you about a little bit, New York. So Debt was the Jeopardy wall, okay? And likewise, just funny categories as opposed to straight categories. Now, I've been through this with I'm Telling, taking other shows and just changing them enough so that you're not going to get sued. Well, guess what? They did get sued. And they had to change the whole format of the show for the second season, which I wound up doing. Dean Young, who'd worked with me on The Perfect Score at CBS, he produced the first season. They were unhappy with him. I presumably was the pop culture king, which I was back when I did Couch Potatoes, my show, in the late 80s. But this is 10 years later. And I wasn't up to, I'd been working. I'd been running around and back and forth. And I told Andrew Golder, the EP, who's now doing Penn and Teller, not doing, he's producing the show.
I was about to say.
Percy is married.
Producing their show.
Yeah. And so Andrew hired me to produce that. And the biggest problem, there are way too many problems. One problem was Wink Martindale and I were friends from way back. In 1987, Wink and I were coming up with shows together. And Wink had been burned by his former partner, who was taking money from Wink for coming up with ideas. I know I'm going back in time, but who cares? And Wink lived in Malibu. It was a hell of a long drive for me to go to Malibu every day. And but we came up with shows. And again, we pitched Second Honeymoon. And actually, I did the second honeymoon presentation without Wink even being there, did that for King World. They went ahead with it. Bumper Stumpers, we came up with a show called Squeeze It. And I'm proud to have just found this. Where the hell is it? It's just the cover. Nobody can read this, but it's The Tennis Racket. Okay, a situation comedy written and developed by David Greenfield, based on a concept by Wink Martindale. This was the only sitcom I ever wrote. And it was a tennis racket, as in not a racket, but hey, it's a racket spelled differently. And so Wink and I were doing that. And then again, as I mentioned before, Chaim Saban offers me this incredible job, Vice President of Development and Production. What was there to produce and develop? But, he was paying me and Wink wasn't. And I remember saying to Wink, I'm not repeating myself, Wink, I got to go take this job. He's like, oh, okay, all right, well, we've got to work on. Anyway, a few months later, I really let Wink down because he said, hey, we got a meeting with whoever the company was on the tennis racket. And I, for whatever reason, thought Wink was going to take the lead on the pitch. And he didn't. And I had forgotten it. And so Wink says, go ahead, David. And I was like, okay, well, the main character, and it didn't sell, needless to say, but it was like 6 months since I had written it. And I thought Wink was on top of that. My fault. Okay, so now I'm at debt and I'm really looking forward to seeing Wink. And Andrew explains to me, you're not going down to the studio. I need you here doing the material, because we had more writers on that show than any show I'd ever done. I mean, 8 or 9 different writers. Some of them went on to bigger and better things. Most of them did. But it was just a writing intensive show, and a myriad of material is coming into my office, which was the same office I had had many, many times at KTLA, which is Sunset Studios. It's a nice thing about Hollywood. You wind up 3 years later being in the same office again, and you put up your paintings or whatever. But the same reason I can't produce Jeopardy and Harry can and did. Whether it's I don't know, pick anything. The Roman Empire. Okay, I am not qualified to put questions in order of difficulty for questions about the Roman Empire. My historical background is not that encompassing. And even if you read up on the stuff, how do you decide what America is going to think is a $300 question as opposed to a $100 question, or as opposed to a $500 question? Same thing for debt. On a show which maybe you've heard of, or a movie that you haven't seen, how do you possibly put that in order? Answer is the best you can. So I did that, but it was a nightmare. Because I was stuck in my office the entire time, never did go down to the studio. I don't think I even saw Wink, until we wrapped. Like, Wink, David. and then the show was over, thank goodness. And what else can I tell you about debt other than really talented people not working on what I considered a great show? At the same time we were doing debt, they were also shooting Win Ben Stein's Money. Now that I thought was a well-produced and well-thought-out show. It was also Jimmy Kimmel's first show. It's funny how, Jimmy's doing that, and then I can go back to Stone Stanley, and then Jimmy's coming over to do the Man Show. And yet Jimmy and I saw him about a year ago in Redondo Beach. He remembers me, but we never got a chance to work together, unfortunately. So I went from Zooventure to debt. Then I did The Imposters in New York. And I told you, biggest mistake I made, Zooventure was picked up, of course. I told you Animal Planet fell in love with me. Animal Planet doesn't exist anymore. Well, maybe a planet does, but the
network
channel doesn't. And I started doing it at the same time. Vin Di Bona, who produces America's Funniest Home Videos, excuse me, and confused the heck out of me because the show had been on the air for years and went through a series of, Saget, who did Dating Game for me, he was the first host. And normally, like Stone Stanley or anybody else, you build upon that. Once you have a hit show, you start selling other shows. You bring in other people's ideas if you don't have any of your own. And anyway, not so at Vin Di Bona's. America's Funniest was his strength and still is. Anyway, so I'm starting Zooventure, but I'm also being interviewed by Vin on a show called Off the Wall for Disney Channel. Had never worked for Disney Channel before. And luckily, after Zooventure, again, it's Todd and John and I again from Zooventure, from Shop, etc. And I'll take credit for this. I came up with a terrific bonus round, which was we didn't really have a good bonus round for Zooventure, but we met with Bill Bonner, who was a wonderful art director, did the Emmys, did the Academy Awards, just been around for a million years. I hope he still is around. We pitched my bonus round, and the staff was all in place, and I approved of the budget with Wileen May, who's a wonderful executive in charge of production, and Vin just offered me way too much money, and I jumped ship because I felt, that the show now can basically produce itself, because again, we had so much fun and it was so easy the first season, and now we had a solid second season, also stunts to draw from for the first season, whereas the show called Off the Wall, you never saw it, did you?
No, never did.
Nobody did. It was simply a show that he bought from somebody else, where the kids in studio are looking at 9 different video screens, freezes of different people. It could be kids, they could be adults, they could be from other lands, but the whole idea was you'd have to perform a stunt against the other person. Could be as simple as a staring contest. Okay, you against me, I Marc, it's set, go. Okay, and what the kid would do is pick the person that they wanted to play against. Maybe they want to play against an 8-year-old, maybe they want to play against a 50-year-old. But the stunts were as silly or as simple as a staring contest. And we shot all of those 9 people at Disneyland. So once again, I'm out of here. I had to go down to Anaheim, live down in Disneyland for about 3 months, and shot, luckily, Steve Grant, who did Playboy's Bloopers and Practical Jokes, and also part-time Shop to Drop directing. He was directing, so he'd have one camera, he's directing stuff, and I've got the other camera. I'm over at Sleeping Beauty's castle, whatever the hell it's called, shooting the other stunts. And we're just grabbing people and shooting, grabbing people and shooting. And so we had to lock into the stunts early on. Now, Vin, when he explained the show to me, I said, well, what kind of stunts are we talking about? He says, oh, I got one, hang on. He doesn't talk like that. I'm just changing my voice. Hey, wait a second. Yeah, I get this. All right. You see that trash basket over there? Okay. Here's what I do. Okay, you ready? Okay, and boom. Okay, I missed it. Boom. Now, his assistant's there, and they're all nodding. I'm going, the hell is this? What, throwing trash in a basket? And we didn't stray that far from it because, with stunt shows, you need a stunt budget. And our stunt budget was very small. And 2 gentlemen who I've worked with many times, because remember, now I got Todd and John doing Zooventure in my absence. And I'm doing Off the Wall. So I did with Scott Halleck and Kevin Healy, who had written Debt with me. And they're great writers, but again, not good stunt producers. When I say not good stunt producers, not stunt producers, again, it's on the job training. So we did that show. And again, Disney Channel and Vin wanted a crazy person as the host, because again, new kids show. And we hired a guy who actually was very competent. His name was Larry Zeno. He had red hair like Carrot Top and just bursting out of his head. And he did a little Larry Zeno dance, and he was entertaining, but the show itself, I mean, it was like pizza eating contest. We almost killed these kids. It's like, okay, how many slices of pizza can you eat in 3 minutes? Go. Okay, that's just what you want. 9-year-olds stuffing pizza and almost choking to death against some 70-year-old without teeth. So that came and went, but I made a lot of money. Now, in between times, you know, I had done, again, I've done so many variations of the Newlywed Game, it makes me crazy. But also in Orlando, I went down there for Bob Eubanks because he was a friend, and they were doing a show called Family Secrets. And Family Secrets was the same thing again, except instead of husbands and wives or brothers and sisters, it was parents and their kids. And the nice thing about that show was I could kind of push the kids when I was briefing them into suggestions without cheating. And the reason I even bring this up was it was years after Bob and I had done the Newlywed Game. And at that point, Bob refused to believe that In the Butt Bob had been an answer on the show. You know what I'm referring to, right? But
Yep.
I remembered it. You know, I was there. I knew it, and I could not convince Bob of that. So we had written one question, and it was something about their mother's body, you know, which was the biggest or too big for her body or whatever. And the kids somehow, with minor manipulation from me, said, well, that would have to be the butt, Bob. Bob looks over at me. The other kid on the other team, you know, that'd have to be the butt, Bob. And these kids had no idea that that had any reference to Newlywed Game. But Bob just never gets furious, but it was interesting. Anyway, all right. So fast forward. Excuse me. So I finished off the wall, thank goodness. And again, made a lot of money. Stone Stanley, gee, what a surprise. Having yet another show. It's called I Can't Believe You Said That. And what was that show about? That's right. Families. Who knows their parents better, this family or that family? It was on the Fox Family Channel. Family Channel became the Fox Family Channel in the couple of years that had transpired. So we did that for Fox Family. Great set. John Salley, do you know him at all? He was a Laker. Oh, he was an LA Laker. He was a basketball player. Very well spoken, very articulate, very funny guy. But again, you know, for any of these Newlywed Game shows, you can't just throw somebody in there. I told you what happened with Lori Faso and I'm Telling. Again, the show worked when I did it, or if Mark Summers could do it, or Bob, or, you know, but John never went, you know, it was question, answer. Okay, next question, answer. That's funny. So John, you know, I produced a show with Mark Summers. We got co-producer credit. And Mark's always easy and fun to work with. I've known him, you know, since he was a warm-up guy. And Mark, with his OCD, we'd never been in the office together. So the most fun I'd have, because he'd always come in late, was when he left the office, everything had to be precise and set up. And I would, first thing in the morning, I would take his pencil and I'd move it around. I'd turn his computer, and he never once commented or noticed. He just straightened everything and did his Mark thing. And that was that. But producing was fun. We had a guy named Anthony Ross working for the company at that point. I was relying on him a lot for interviewing the kids. Again, the same as closer to love connection, in that we were able to talk to these people over the phone without them figuring out where we were going. Family Secrets, they were hearing these questions for the first time, and we're meeting them for the first time on set, and it transpired that way. I Can't Believe That You Said That. Different. We were able to talk to the families about a wide variety of things, and they would not have any clue where we were headed to, and sometimes neither did we. But the show might have succeeded, because again, it's like the Newlywed Game. The show wouldn't have succeeded without Bob. You know, it was a success because of Bob, and ultimately too, because Chuck was smart enough to hire the right people to produce it. But I Can't Believe You Said That. We tried with John, and again, he came close, and he was just such a terrific guy, but the show just didn't work out. So we went one season, and that was that, and it was disappointing. Tell you one separate John Salley story. So John's still playing with the Lakers. Okay, my dad, who I saw down the street earlier, looks good, 100 years old. Dad was never into sports. He's always been a scientist. And because John was with the Lakers, you know, he'd get me seats. I said, Dad, come on, you got to go to one basketball game in your life. So we were like third row, courtside, and my dad basketball didn't faze him. Kobe, he said, yeah, this guy's great, but Shaq, Dad could not get over the size of Shaq lumbering up and down the court. He was amazed by it. So John's there, and John knows where I'm sitting, and I swear to God, John is he's looking over at me, and Diane Cannon's kind of in the way, but he, without me doing it, he went up to his face, and we'll just say that it was this finger, and he just went like this to me during a break. And that was John's sense of humor. So it wasn't this finger. And my dad looked at me, and Diane, anyway, it was a funny moment. But great guy, decent show. We did our best to produce it. I mentioned Marc. You know, Marc did his best. You know, while I was briefing the contestants in between commercial breaks, Marc was working with John. But, and again, John is wonderfully personable, but it just takes some kind of talent. Has nothing to do with charisma or anything, or learning or anything, just knowing how to work within the framework of those shows. That's it. So yeah, that was, I can't believe you said that. Right at that time, they were also doing a show called Bobcat's Big Ass Game Show, which a lot of networks refused to say big ass. So it was just called Bobcat's Big Show in the TV guide listings. Anyway, the producer left, and I had to produce the last few episodes, which again, you know, it was, I had no idea. I hadn't watched the show, so I had to quickly learn to produce the show. And I'd heard that Bobcat was pretty tough to work with, but luckily I made it through the shows, and we were friends. And yeah, and that was that. That was Bobcat, just for a couple of shows. And yeah, what else can I tell you?
You wrote for a little bit for Hollywood Squares. We've already talked a little bit on the Meryl Heater, but was that experience different?
I came back. I did Hollywood Squares after Bobcat, because Stone Stanley, they were doing the Man Show again. But you know, Stone Stanley kept me on for like 6 months. You know, we're all done, but because I was able to pinch hit for other shows, you know, they kept me on board. And again, I found this, the top 10 of everything. It was some show that I must have been working on for them. The one example I have here, the top 10 cars most stolen in the United States. And at that time, a Jeep Cherokee was the most stolen car in the United States. That was fun. But yeah, I made a deal because I had done so many square shows. Whoopi Goldberg was now the center square. I guess it was 1999, thereabouts, maybe 2000. And Tom Bergeron was hosting. And I made a deal. I said, I'll write the questions, not all the, I'll write the questions and I'll write the jokes, but I'm going to work from home. Because at this point, not only did I have a computer, I had internet, okay? And internet was more trivia than, you know, what we've got now. But, you know, we were able to set up just, you know, a lot of stuff, because I had all my All-Star Blitz questions, which, by the way, I never finished. If I may just go back in time. Okay. The easiest way to produce these shows, as I've explained before, number one, the celebrities have a card with the jokes in order. Peter Marshall, we'll just take, for example, All-Star Blitz. Peter's got his slush pile, which I put together, which are all the questions in order. But I would flip a switch, which would light on Peter's podium. So let's say it's going to be Rosemarie. Okay. So Peter knows to pick this question from Rosemary's. Meantime, Ro has a light in front of her. Okay, it's the same light. She's got a light. Peter's got a light. So she knows now it's time to do the joke. Okay, so the only trick to this whole show was making sure they don't look down and then look up, that they know the joke ahead of time. Meantime, while they're thinking about what the answer is, they can glance down at the two answers. For example, Phyllis Diller didn't start this until she was 37 years old. What? The answers were comedy or a family. The joke answer could be didn't have until she was 30, puberty, worrying man, whatever. An Englishman named Roddy Llewellyn carried on a liaison with this woman for almost 10 years. Who is she? And the answers are either Princess Margaret or Sophia Loren. And today you say Billie Eilish, or pick somebody young, whatever. But these were evergreen. I reused a lot of Hollywood Squares questions. I wrote tons of material, and I was thrilled to be in the company of Bruce Valanche, who was a terrific writer, Dave Boone, and John Max, all of whom have gone on. They write the Academy Awards, they write the Emmys, and they're all very successful, and I am pleased for them. So yeah, that was Hollywood Squares. So I did that from home, but of course, being at home didn't help me very much in terms of being out there in the world. I was in between agents. I signed with APA, and Stone Stanley didn't have anything. So once again, I delved into my own pocket and went to Hawaii, went to Maui, and did my own stunt show, which I think I mentioned to you before, which is an over-the-top, sexy, pretty out there game show dance party. And Hawaiian Beach Party, more fun because we had no staff. It was just Art Alisi, who had been the prize guy for Merrill Heater, and he funded it, and me. I hired a crew there. I hired lighting, and got every contestant, including the host, out of Gold's Gym in Maui, and produced, directed the show. And that was it. That was around 2000. And then after that, I was getting old. And as I told you before, it was pretty well known that if you were over 40 and you didn't have your own production company, more likely than not, they're going to hire a 22-year-old for half the money that you at 45 are making. I went into this show, which once again, Bob Bowden came to me because it was a show for Game Show Network, and Bob was heading up Game Show Network. And he tossed me into a show called Cram, which was, you're familiar with the show.
Yeah. But for someone who's not.
I'm sorry?
But for someone who's not, feel free to explain it.
Oh, no. Well, again, if I can even remember it, it was so complicated. We had a variety of stunts. They started off on a spinning wheel, okay, on a stationary hamster spinning wheel where we'd ask questions. And if you got a question wrong, the wheel would spin faster and you'd have to do stuff like that. Same thing. There was basically what they had to do was the show would start off and we'd say, here's a book on yoga, here's a book of riddles, here's a book on, we'll go back to the Roman Empire. You guys are going to go into the Cram Chambers, which was on Hollywood Boulevard, and basically a window out to Hollywood Boulevard. And we took the contestants, these are adults now, couples generally, and put them in these Cram Chambers, and they would stay up all night and study and study and study. Now, the problem with that show for me was I didn't stay up all night and study and study and study. So, for example, when it came to judging the yoga, it was almost like being back with D under Olmec. It's like, if you're supposed to be doing this and you're doing this, it's like, holy crap, what do I decide? So that was rough. The ding buzz on that kind of show, just keeping up with riddles, for example. We had the guy on a bicycle, okay, and the girls answering the riddles, and the guy has to start at 10 miles per hour, and then every one they get wrong, 15 miles an hour, 20 miles per hour. And then we had a trivia round where we have this old lady, they'd go into this big bed. I know this sounds crazy, but it was a variety of different stunt games that didn't really come together, but I guess it worked. But yeah, so there was a giant bed and this woman, like I just said, with a Jeep Cherokee, it's the most stolen car in the world, and they would have to answer, and they would answer from bed. Okay. So my problem with that show was from the minute I walked in, and again, they knew Game Show Network had put me in charge, and I came in a week later. Not unlike Family Challenge, there were two sets of production. Okay. There was a guy named Rob Floyd, can't remember. He had one set of producers and segment producers. I inherited this other group, but from day one, it was like this. I got a bald spot. I'm in my late 40s. They're all 20. I was too old for that show. It was really horrible because I started making mistakes because, A, I had high blood pressure, didn't know it. B, I could tell that nobody was terribly supportive of me, didn't really want me there in the first place. They never hired me. Game Show Network pushed me in there. And it was the only show where, there were several times where we had to stop tape because of me, because I made a mistake or I couldn't catch up. So I left there, and, it was mutual. I had no problem with that. But, it got tougher the older I got, except for the places where I was known, like Stone Stanley, et cetera, to get jobs. At that point, my mom fell, and my career pretty much ended because she had a brain bleed. Without ruining everybody's life here, my dad didn't react to that. And at that point, I realized my dad had dementia, and I wound up taking care of them. And sorry, something on my stomach. And it's a centipede. And so that was that. I couldn't work anymore because I had to take care of my folks. And some people, like Harry, a few years later, one of our shows I mentioned to you that I did for Dick Clark was the Know-It-Alls. And Harry, even though Harry was doing Jeopardy and Wheel, he said, if we sell the Know-It-Alls, I'll give you 50%, piece, whatever, you're not going to be on set, you'll do what you're doing and you'll get half. I said, fine. But unfortunately it didn't sell, and, Harry was busy. So that is pretty much it, from 1977 till 2003, 2004, those were my years. But I got to say, again, I'm happy with all my decisions except for doing Family Challenge, but we made it through. And again, I should have stayed with Zooventure for that second season, even though All American, which was producing Baywatch, got eaten up into Fremantle, which is huge. And I believe Fremantle now is somehow involved with Password, Family Feud, which I also wrote Family Feud for a while. I did everything for a while. If somebody needed me for a few weeks, I do it. But Family Feud wasn't right for me because, the question
is this the Ray Combs era or the Louis Anderson era or the?
It was Louis Anderson. Yeah, it was again. It was after 2000, and Michael Cantor was producing. Once again, Bob Bowden was there, but I wanted to do more outrageous stuff. I was coming off the Hollywood Squares, and Family Feud was just too pedestrian for me to write. I would rather write, if you were on an alien world, what would you, I would do that kind of, they say, David, make it simple. And, I much prefer, of all the shows that I could have and have written for, Hollywood Squares and its various incarnations became the easiest for me. Even though the learning curve took a while, you just get it after a while. Just like, again, John Salley, perfect example. If John had had more experience doing, I Can't Believe You Said That, he's smart enough, certainly, that he could have gotten it. But you just don't have the time you can train somebody, but and Lori Faso and I'm telling, you can train somebody, but you just don't have the time. Bob Eubanks, when we did Newlywed Game in 77, he'd already done 7 years of the Newlywed Game, so you didn't have to train him to do anything. He'd done it in prime time years before. And Bob could still do it today. It's 2022. I guarantee you, you put Bob on Newlywed Game, he'll do a great job, and the show would be a hit. But I'm not in charge. So what else can I tell you?
What have you been, what after, if you don't mind saying, after you left the television industry, what projects, if any, did you work on?
None, I don't think. Because again, I'm very much of a loner, which is one reason I wanted to write Hollywood Squares from home. Plus, all the Hollywood Squares writers were in their 20s, and I'm in the again, I was in my 40s, almost 50. No, after Hawaiian Beach Party, no, I couldn't, because again, without too much details, my mom had a brain bleed and she had a stroke. And because I refused to operate on her, because I had had a craniotomy and I had promised her that if anything ever happened to her, I would not have her skull open and deal with that kind of pain. So at the hospital, they threw us out, and I threw my sister out of her apartment because my dad was too insane to keep her at his house. And for the next year and a half, I was with my mom every day at my sister's, just trying to get her to talk, to speak, to think, and ultimately to walk. Because back then, to get into assisted living, you had to be able to walk. And after a stroke, it's near impossible. And physical therapy, it was over a year before I could get her into assisted living. Once I got her into assisted living, my dad was still living at home in his house in Calabasas. They had taken his driver's license away. So he's just walking around. People were starting to get cell phones. So dad would walk somewhere and say, excuse me, can I borrow your phone? And I'd get a call from, excuse me, is your name David? Yes. Your father wants to talk to you. Hi, Dad, where are you? I'm at the mall. Which one? I'm right out. Okay. And I'd go pick him up, and then I'd have dinner with him, and then back to my mom's. And unfortunately, I mean, it was fortunate. I loved being there. I'm still there for my dad, 17 years later. But I didn't realize at that time that I would become a caregiver for my parents, because there was nobody else to do it. You can hire caregivers, but caregivers are not nurses. And it was a burden, still is, but it's a burden I love because they're my parents and I had to do it. And again, I had a great career without paying any dues. Again, I moved out here. I got a job the third day I was out here, and I worked consistently through the years, with the exception of 81 when there was no season. And again, Chuck filled in again with that $1 a second pilot. And likewise, I produced my freeze frame pilot with Jack Clark. So I made just enough money to get by. But yeah, other than that, yeah, it was a dream come true.
How do you feel television? Do you still watch television after having left it, if at all?
Yes.
How do you feel it's changed since you started? For the better, for the worse? In what way?
Game shows or television?
Both.
Well, I'll say game shows in the morning, I think, are better. And part of the reason is the original producers of the shows really are the ones that stood them up on their feet. Price is Right. Mine's going to blank. Gabby Johnston. Okay. Gabby had worked on all the Goodson shows back when. Okay. And Gabby was now over at All American when they started Feud and Price is Right. Bob Noah also, who's older than me, but had produced every Password, but produced all the great shows. And so they started there and they stayed there. And so you had the original producers setting up everything. and getting Drew Carey was the right decision. Wayne Brady, all of these guys had the chops to be the host. Louis Anderson, I still question. I personally didn't think he was the best choice, but again, you had good producers around him, and then they made it work. But then Ray Combs, I didn't think was terrific on Family Feud either. But yeah, I think those particular game shows in the morning just followed the original ideas. They didn't try and reinvent anything. The basic premises stayed the same. Just like, Harry with Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. Don't mess with it. Granted, social media brings it into a whole different arena, and you've got to reach out to Facebook and Twitter and all sorts of other areas. But it also, with its success, it became bigger, and Harry was able to take those shows and take them to places that Merv, may rest in peace, had never thought of, because you don't take a game show set and move it to Hawaii or move it to Chicago, and yet they did, and they were able to do it. Because again, the shows were phenomenally successful, number 1 and 2 with the ratings in the syndicated versions. And so, yeah, I think they all did well. The mistake for me has come more recently with people thinking that every game show ever created can be a primetime show. And it's an hour. Let's face it, Dating Game, when I did it, it was 2 dates and a half hour. 2 dates, okay? Because you couldn't make one date last the entire half hour. You had to get 2 dates, 10 minutes each, and that made a show. But an hour, they don't work. There's too much in between time. When you're doing a game show, the whole idea is to keep the show moving and keep the show entertained, not stop down for a minute and say, hey, wow, or comment on the show. That never works on a game show. You don't stop the action to comment on it. You keep the action going, and it culminates in a bonus round. And that's the whole idea of every show I ever did. Even Family Challenge had a great, an odd but interesting bonus round. Everybody still loves the Temple Run on Legends. The only shows that didn't need a great bonus round were Newlywed Game and Dating Game, because the shows themselves just were sustainable, because you didn't know what these people were going to say. And as I've mentioned to you before, because we were so particular, and they couldn't afford to be that way now. Again, 1 out of every 18 couples, that was our ratio. 100,000 people we had to interview to get those 525 Newlywed Games, which still get laughs and are still airable. Dating Game, again, we were really tough, but we had every actor, every actress, everybody that had talent on the show. The one person, this is sort of a silly thing, the one person I still regret, and then I want to go back to your
How has TV changed? No.
Yes and no. We're talking about interracial dating. Prior to that, because I just forgot what I was going to say now. Sorry, no sleep.
All right.
Where was I before I just jumped?
We were talking about hour-long television and how the game show format doesn't work, and how you had a bonus round that worked, and how Newlywed Game still flows today.
Right. Yeah, and I forgot where I was going after that. But okay, just going back to interracial, which on Newlywed Game, we couldn't quite do that yet, but it was the 70s. But we were allowed, we had little people on, and one mistake I made was we had 2 hunky bachelors on the show, okay, and a little person by the name of Cork Hubbard. He went by the name Corky back then. And he's an actor, and he does a lot of work and such, but he had the personality, and Terry, the girl, chose bachelor number 2. So bachelor number 1 comes around. Wow, it's great. Bachelor number 3 comes around. Whoa. And now Cork comes around, and she looks down, and she started crying. Okay, and she cried, and she cried, and she cried. And next day, Chuck fined me $2 for putting them on the show. Okay, fast forward now. That's 77. Okay, by 1990, is that when we did Love Connection? Because again, you had asked
Who was the announcer? Remember
on Love Connection?
when you worked on it?
Don't remember his name.
It wasn't John, was it?
John.
Cervenka?
Yeah, it was.
It was.
John.
It was John. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll tell him
I
I
was
said hi.
thinking yeah, no, I'm thinking Johnny Olson. John. Yeah, no, that's right. John Cervenka.
92.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was John. Yeah, it had to be. And again, it's again same with the computers, the fax machine, trying to bring Love Connection into the 1990s. And so again, I tried to convince him that we could finally maybe get one interracial show. No. So finally, he thinks he's given in. And I'm mentioning this whole story because I'm embarrassed in retrospect and was embarrassed at the time. So what he decided to do was
He being Woody Frazier.
no,
Or,
he
Larry
Eric Lieber, who again was the meanest person I've ever worked for, and let his family sue me, but that's true. And what's strange about that is Eric was evidently born in a concentration camp. Okay, and obviously he was a little kid when he left, and you would think this would be a person with heart, but again, just tough. Anyway, Eric said, all right, this is what we're going to do. I'll let you set up a guy with 3 Asian girls. I said, okay, because I don't know. But the way he set it up, I'll never forget this. It's just one episode. A Korean girl, a Japanese girl, and a Chinese girl. And that was his idea of interracial dating. And I was like, if he had just gotten 3 Chinese women, say, and this guy loves Chinese, it made no sense. It still makes no sense. And it was embarrassing then, and it's embarrassing now.
Was the Bachelor Asian American? Or was
No, it's just a regular old white guy.
Caucasian.
Caucasian. And had no proclivities towards anything. But again, it was 1990. Everybody was dating everybody. And yeah, there was no reason not to do it other than but ultimately, I'm sure after I left Love Connection, they must have done it. And on Dating Game, I was heading there anyway. We were very conscious. We wanted more Black people, more Asian people. And there weren't that many in the 70s, there weren't that many people of color on game shows, let alone dating shows. But, I was proud of the fact that we did that. I started to say the one person that I felt bad that we didn't put on the show, and it's just me being a big kid, Stymie Beard came in to one of our interviews. Stymie Beard was in The Little Rascals. He was the Black kid with the big derby hat. And he was in his 50s, and he came in with a derby hat, and you could not recognize him. I won't mention all the other celebrities we had because they'll yell at me because it'll date them, and you'll know how old they are. But we didn't put Stymie on, and I still feel bad about that because the guy hadn't worked in years, and he was Stymie from The Little Rascals. That impressed me at the time. Anyway, yeah, long time ago.
Professionally speaking, what's your proudest achievement?
Boy, I don't know. I'd have to say proudest achievement. I mean, the show I'm evidently best remembered for is Legends of the Hidden Temple, only because of the fan base, but that was one season. I guess I'm proudest of the Newlywed Game because it was my first show. We did over 500. We started with nobody knowing what the show was because it'd been off the air for 8 or 9 years. Again, just cold calls, bringing people in, working 7 days a week, and having a good time doing it. So I guess I'm proudest of that because people again, I judge a lot of stuff by YouTube reactions, and I see how, anybody takes, even though Paramount Plus is running Legends of the Hidden Temple, anybody who puts an episode of Legends on YouTube, just the episode, no commentaries, boom, 60,000 views. It's amazing. And same thing, Scott Satin was a good producer. I'm told he's not feeling well, but he did a series of those outrageous game show moments, which I think he did for GSN, Game Show Network. And they use a ton of our Newlywed Game questions. And again, they get laughs. Anytime you put any of our Newlywed Games on, it works. When George Clooney produced Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, they were talking to Sam Rockwell as Chuck Barris about ABC, the network. The show, the questions being too titillating. They didn't show any of the questions from 1967 in the movie. The questions that you see, they're the questions that we wrote for our syndicated version. Doesn't much matter in the mix, but ABC never would have allowed our questions on the air. Again, because we could push the envelope so far in the 70s, again, sexual revolution, hippies, all that kind of stuff. It was that era, and it was very festive. But, all in all, and again, I love Chuck. He was one of the nicest guys. And yet, of course, this is not a specific show, but Stone Stanley always being there for me and me producing at least 6 or 7 shows for them. And then at the end, and I might have come back for this, I can't remember, because I was in at Hollywood Center, and the Man Show had taken over this one building. Okay, the Man Show with Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Carolla. And so they're producing their show, and I'm in my own office producing nothing. But again, my job was to come up with other shows or taking tapes from other countries and figuring out A, what the hell the show was about, because they weren't in English, and then B, trying to cut together. They gave me editing budgets, and I would cut together what I thought would be a show with the material that I had, and then write my own script, and then do the voiceover, and then present it to Scott and David, and we'd sell it or we wouldn't. So that was pretty nifty, just being on staff forever for no particular reason. We even tried Uno, okay? And again, the one time Bob Bowden wasn't vice president of a network, Bob needed a job, or so he thought. Bob's always worried about not working. Again, he's doing funny, you should ask now. But it brought Bob in. He'd never been a producer before. And we worked together. It was David Stanley, myself, and Bob working on Uno, trying to figure out, but there is no game show in Uno, or it would have been done by now. I'll take you back one more time. The Man Show was in the same office where Sid and Marty Krofft had been. If you're not familiar with Sid and Marty Krofft, years and years ago, they had the Krofft puppets, which were human beings in puppet heads. They did shows like H.R. Puffin stuff, Land of the Lost. Then they went on to produce the Mandrell Sisters show. So my sister is 4 years younger than me, and she used to watch those Krofft shows on TV, but I was too grown up. So again, they went and switched gears and became big producers. And then once Donnie and Marie were off, and likewise the Mandrell Sisters were off, they had nothing going on. And Harry Friedman and I were in between gigs, and they wanted somebody to create a game show, but a game show world. Now, Merrill Heater, who I mention all the time, Hollywood Squares, Gambit, High Rollers, etc., another guy kept me employed for years. In fact, I'm sorry, you asked me about game shows since then. Catch 21 is a show on Game Show Network. And once, again, my mom was down, my dad was down, Merrill Heater did call me up and asked me if I'd be willing to produce Catch 21. I said, I'm taking care of my folks. He said, well, Scott Sternberg was a wonderful producer. He said, the two of you can co-produce it. I said, if you got Scott, you really don't need me. It's like Harry and I, you don't really need two producers who do the same thing all the time. So Catch 21, whenever that was, I made it very clear there was no way I could go back to full-time stuff. Who's going to, take my mom to the doctor, as silly as that sounds. Anyway, so Sid Marty Krofft wanted a show like Merrill Heater's Shenanigans, which I grew up on. Shenanigans was a big playground, okay, and it was a big board game, and you'd take steps, and I'm sure there were other shows like that as well, but that's the only one that comes to mind. So you'd go and I'm sorry, it was Shenanigans, and Merrill Heater also had Video Village. We're going way back, 1960s. And so Harry and I were supposed to come up with a show like that. And we go into Sid Marty Krofft's office, suite of offices, which again became the Man Show offices. And it's Sid, who had a really high voice, and he was the puppeteer, and he's a great guy, and he talked like this, and he's very animated. And his office, he had all these puppets and marionettes, and he was terrific. And then there was Sid. He was more the businessman. He had a deep voice, and they're both still alive, and God bless them. And there was Trudy, their assistant, who was about 60, and that was it. It was the three of them, and then Harry and I come in with the suite of offices. So Harry and I go in there, and we created a show called Hot Pursuit, which we quickly learned, you can't call it Hot Pursuit because there's already a show registered to Writers Guild called Hot Pursuit. So Harry and I, being geniuses, changed it to In Hot Pursuit, which is not as good. Like that jerk changing my show freeze frame to flash frame. Anyway, but Harry and I, to this day, when we speak, we still crack up over it because we came up with crazy characters. I don't remember how the game played, neither does he, but we came up with, there was Mr. Fancy Pants, and he was in charge of this. And then there was a sexy woman, Vivian Vavoom, and there was Mr. Fancy Pants' cousin, Mr. Smarty Pants. He had all the answers, and we created all these characters. We just cracked each other up. I forget how long we did it for. It was about 3 weeks, maybe. We wrote the show up, and they kind of liked it, but it just sort of fizzled. I don't know if Sid Marty actually did anything after that, but we had fun. And it was one of the sillier things we did. But again, kind of like Critical Decisions, there are certain things to this day we still laugh about because, it was just silly. And, Harry, as solid as a producer and as laid back as he is now, has a very silly side to him as well. So there you go. Other than at the very end of my career, I did do one last show for RDF Media called Fake Out. And I didn't care much for the premise, but it was hosted by a guy named Jack Tremarco. And he was the #1 FBI lie detector. Sorry, no sleep. Lie detector expert in the country, and sweetheart of a guy. And the way the show worked, we had contestants set up. We'd have various scenarios set up, and people would have to, from Jack training them, the first part of the show, they would have to tell if somebody was lying or not based on their lie detection abilities. While I didn't care, again, it was an ageism kind of thing. I was the oldest person there. I was working for Gene Siskel and Ebert. I was working for his kids. Again, I was 15 years older than everybody else, at least. And the show went off. It was fine, except once again, they wanted what I call the one-on-ones. Stop in the middle of the round, put them in front of a freestanding wall, shoot, what do you think about what just happened? Okay, it just stops the flow, and which I hate, but I did it for that show, and it was okay, but for me, the only interesting thing was, well, the way I had to shoot it, because they had to actually go to other places for the fake outs. I'd have to start the show at 4:00 in the morning for the openings. And not unlike Legends, I would do segment by, the first segments, then the second segments, and the third segments. Took forever. But it's the only show where, again, my ESU, starting point was 4:30 in the morning, and Jack and I would be there. And Jack would bring other FBI agents with, and I'd say, "What do you do for the FBI?" "I'm a sniper." "What do you do for that?" Every single person from the FBI was a sniper. It was just amazing. And these were the nicest guys maybe I've ever met. They would all hang out because their friend Jack was on the show, and Jack was retiring from the FBI. But these were all active agents. They gave me an FBI baseball cap, which I said, okay, great. So one thing you don't understand, if you wear an FBI baseball cap and it's embossed, meaning not just silkscreen, it's actually embossed and you can feel the letters, unless you're with the FBI or somebody from the FBI gave it to you, you can be arrested. So I still got the FBI cap here somewhere, and I wore it a few times. But yeah, that was the only interesting. I think that was the last show outside of Hawaiian Beach Party that I actually produced. But you can see it's forgettable since, yeah. And I didn't know anybody at all on that staff. There's nobody to bring in because RDF had their own people, and they were terrific folks. But again, I always draw, Mr. Carson and I, John never liked going to the rap parties, and neither did I. I remember desperately trying to get out of the fake out rap party, and everybody said, "Where are you going? Where are you going? You're the producer." I was like, "Yeah, okay." And I just didn't want to be there. And John would do the same thing, even on the Tonight Show. He'd be wherever he'd be, he would go into a room and he would sneak out. That was the only difference. I would try and say goodbye to a couple people, but John Carson, not good at parties, because again, he didn't want to have to be Johnny Carson and be that person, because that wasn't him. And so he would just sneak out or leave, and people thought he was rude, but he was not rude at all. He was just a loner. John was a loner, and I am too, or I wouldn't be here. I'm still single. I'm 67 years old. I've had about a zillion first dates and more girlfriends than I care to think about. But, John was married 4 times, and even Alex, the last one, well, I won't go into Mr. Carson. So what else can I tell you? I had a lot of fun, and every show that I produced pretty much was a new experience for the first 15 years, because I had never done that kind of, people, "Oh, you do game shows." Well, they're all different kinds of game shows, and I wound up producing either variations on a theme or shows that I had no clue what I was doing, but by the end, I kind of figured it out. Anyway, there you go.
We try to use these videos as learning experiences for people who want to get into the industry. And the question that we always try to end with is, what advice would you have for somebody who wanted to work in the television industry today?
Good question. Take chances. The only way you're going to get into the business is by taking a chance. And by that, I mean, present yourself in such a way that you're remembered. Okay. Doesn't matter. Your education doesn't matter, unfortunately, in the entertainment business. I can't tell you how many high school dropouts I work with. It didn't matter. It's your personality. It's how charismatic you are. That's what's going to get you into television. Okay. You have to have talent too. There's tons of talented people out there, but talent will only get you, it won't get you in the door. Your personality is going to get you in the door. So if you can't get in the door yourself, then write letters, okay? Write letters and write funny letters, write off the wall letters. I remember during that year, 1980, again, 80 or 81, when I was writing letters to Henry Winkler, who just finished Happy Days. He's opening up his production company. It's called Fair Dinkum, so Australian term. And, I wrote a funny letter to Fonzie. And he wrote me back, he said, oh my God, we're the same agency. So people will respond to you if you go off the wall. Disney Channel show. Don't be afraid to take chances, because if you play it too safe, it's kind of like auditions, people, casting calls, if you don't have an agent, and you're going to just go to every casting call, you probably never get work. But you just got to make yourself stand out. The perfect example is Paul Rubens. Okay, when Paul Rubens came in for Dating Game, there was no way we weren't going to put him on the show as Pee-wee. Okay, whereas if he went in for Password, odds are he wouldn't have. So pick what you think is your best niche, where again you think you're talented. And again, I came out of a writing background and also an acting background. So it was real easy for me to become David Greenfield, producer, David Greenfield, big chatty boy, which again is not me. I'm shy, little stuttering, lisping little guy from New Jersey, but knew that I had to create that personality. Which now I can't turn off. Well, I can because I didn't sleep. That would be it. Again, the biggest mistake I think people make is trying to get an agent first, because no agent is going to just hire you out of college, or because, again, you're a great writer. You just getting an agent is not the way to go. If you're a writer, write. If you're a producer, write or produce. The great thing now, it's a whole different world. If I were graduating college now, and I don't know all the platforms, I'm not a social media guy, but hell, I would go on YouTube, and I always, like Marc Summers, I had the design. I knew I could do the Tonight Show if I had to, because back then my brain was in better shape, and I was terrific at interviewing, and I could do that. But I'm not saying I could get it. Again, I'm too Jewish looking for America. But Marc could have done it. Bob Eubanks can do just about anything. And again, in his prime, he could have, and he did. And again, he chose game shows. But remember too, we all started in radio. Wink was on radio forever, and still can be. Eubanks was on radio too, but Bob is an entrepreneur. Bob, instead of just relying on the Newlywed Game, started producing his own shows. He also brought the Beatles to the Hollywood Bowl, for Christ's sakes. Okay, he was just a smart businessman, and he had his hand in many different pots. I was at Chuck Barris for a long time, and I came out of it, quote, as a producer after 4 years. Producer in title only, because again, I was matching up people and getting them hyped for the show and hitting on the girls and getting the guys to be my buddy and all that kind of stuff. That's not really producing. So, but you ultimately will learn that. I did study in college principles of TV directing, which I loved, but that didn't qualify me to be a director, and I never would have gotten a job as a director. So take whatever job you can get, even if it's just a receptionist job and you want to be a producer, take the friggin' job, because as a receptionist, you can shine. When I was answering phones on the Newlywed Game, I got bored, and I'd start doing a Liverpudlian accent, yes, it's the Newlywed Game, 1313 Boyne Street here in Hollywood, poor imitation. But, for me to keep sane, and those hours, I'd have to do really silly stuff, and silly works. Funny always works. So if you've got that and you're charismatic, and you stick to it, yeah, you'll achieve it. But I was lucky.
Thank you, David Greenfield, for telling your story.
Thank you, Joshua.
I do have one last question.
Sure.
Does your neighborhood, does it have more uphills or downhills?
My neighborhood happens to have more, well, inside the house has more uphills, but outside, yeah, those always work. And what's funny about those questions, which of course have nothing to do with the Newlywed Game. Bob, when he does interviews now, he gets stuff a little bit backwards, meaning one of the better questions asked was, in your neighborhood, I forget how Bob frames it now, but the way it's properly framed is, Joshua, and you're very serious, in your neighborhood, now remember, we're talking about your specific neighborhood, does the sun rise in the north, the south, the east, or the west? Of course, when the husband came out, we'd have to switch it around, or they'll always pick the first answer or alphabetical. So in the south, east, so you set it up that way. And same with the uphills and downhills. You got to be very serious. But for north, south, east, west, that you got to be really serious. But Bob, when he talks about it now, and I guess I just have a better memory, he sets it up a little differently and not as in your house. But yeah, you can't go wrong. And that was the great thing about Newlywed Game. What is the round? How tough is it? What is the roundest room in your house or apartment? They'll fight for 15 minutes. Okay, the roundest room. Wait, the kitchen's not round. The bedroom's not round either. Kitchen, those always work. But again, they had nothing to do with being a Newlywed Game, and you could use those questions on Oldywed Games or whatever shows. But again, I was privileged to have worked on a show that could be that silly. I mean, are there more uphills or downhills in your neighborhood? We did it. We asked it. We got great answers. And I'm proud of that because, again, the old Newlywed Game wouldn't have done it. And I don't think a new Newlywed Game now, it probably wouldn't be considered, I don't know, it's not woke. It's not me too. It's not
intellectual.
That, and it's not fair in some way. It's not, but we asked, again, no big surprise, just what your refrigerator. We're talking about your specific refrigerator. What is your what temperature would you say your refrigerator is set at? And all the girls, would say 4. Mine's it's 4, and Bob 4 degrees. Well, yeah, what goes 0 to, and the guys that come out say it would freeze at 4 degrees. And the girls say, no, he doesn't know our refrigerator. It's set to 4. He'd go, and Bob, so what is 4? 4, probably 40 degrees. How do you get it to 80 degrees? You don't. One guy, what is your, what temperature is your refrigerator set at? Guy says 250 degrees. Can't write that kind of stuff. But again, has nothing to do with being married. And yet we had the liberty of doing and asking any question, even though the show was called the Newlywed Game. Same thing with the dating game. Had nothing to do with dates, okay, for the most part. It just was, there were setups to let these guys answer in a funny manner. Because again, in the best of all worlds, we always had at least 1, sometimes 3 stand-up comics up there who were trying, we go to the improv. I mean, luckily, when I moved out here, it was just the New York Improv. And when I moved out here, the LA Improv had just opened up on Melrose. By the time, about 5 or 6 years later, there was a second improv in Santa Monica. So there are 2 improvs. Now we're back to just 1. But then the Laugh Factory started opening up. In New York, Dangerfield started opening up. So all of a sudden now there were places for stand-up comics. But in the 60s and 70s, there was just the Improv on 44th Street, I believe, in Manhattan. And that was it. And I was lucky because A, I was funny, and B, I got to know Bud Friedman, who ran the Improv, and Andy Kaufman was there, Richard Belzer was there, Elaine Boozler was there. And, we got to know all of them. And little did I know, Andy Kaufman, who's doing Mighty Mouse, here I come to say that, he's doing that. And he's going to come on the show. And to this day, people still watch Andy Kaufman doing the Latka character on my old dating game shows from 1978. So, I guess in some ways, it was a long answer to what am I proudest of. I guess it's the longevity of stuff that we had fun doing. When we came up with north, south, east, west, or uphills, downhills, we loved being able to then, because again, Chuck left us alone. Chuck hired us because he knew instinctively or just from hanging out with us that we had it covered. And he never came down to the studio. He never watched the show. He was doing the Gong Show and then the beauty show and everything else. So we had total liberty to do whatever we wanted without hopefully crossing the line. And all right, so we crossed the line. But yeah, you know, it was just great fun. And you didn't mind working 7 days a week. That, by the way, too, you know, when it comes to new people in the business, again, there's so many more opportunities through, I'm guessing, through Twitter, through Facebook, etc. But because there are all those opportunities, I wouldn't do it because I'm thinking everybody else did. If you go personally, again, you want to work for Stone and Company, you know, write a letter to Scott Stone, okay? Nobody else, just write a letter to Scott Stone and say whatever the heck you want, okay? But make it interesting and make yourself, you know, be as flamboyant in your writing as you can so that Scott or anybody that you're trying to get in to see will want to see you. Say, oh my God, this person's funny or brilliant or crazy or whatever. Make yourself distinctive, unique enough that, wow, they want you in there as opposed to you, please, can I have a job, which will never get you at work. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, David Greenfield, for telling your story to us.
Thank you, Joshua. Sorry I look like hell today. This is me on no sleep. Whoa, scary. Okay, fine. Okay.